Welcome to the Fundraising Leadership Podcast, where we engage in lively and thoughtful conversations with professionals in the nonprofit world. And in this case, we're branching out. I am Margaret Katz-Can, and I'm here today with my teammate and friend, Janice Cunning. And we have a super fun guest here today, and I'm going to introduce him in a moment. But first, I think just wanted to let our listeners know that we're mixing it up this year in 2023, aren't we, Janice?
We are. We like to mix it up every year. Keep things fresh.
That's right. So this year, our team really decided to focus on humanity and bringing the human back to humanity in our work and our messaging. And in service of that, we thought that we would focus on personal growth as a podcast topic. And we wanted to find people who had taken a deep personal dive into something. And so this week we have an author on the show. And I'm super happy to introduce you to Mike Rucker. And Mike, as he describes himself in no particular order, author, father, husband, organizational psychologist and behavioral scientist, recovering entrepreneur, fitness enthusiast with mechanical parts, VW bus aficionado, seeker, traveler, future astronaut. And I'm going to add, which is an awesome introduction and fun, because he is also the author of The Fun Habit. Welcome, Mike. We're happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics. So I was super excited to read Mike's book. It's amazing. We're going to link to it in the show notes, and we're really going to encourage everyone. And I think when you were talking, Margaret, it came to me like, yeah, Mike, I'm sure you're seeing this with everyone that you talk to as you're on your book tour, but, the nonprofit sector is really questioning itself, and trying to figure out where it's going to go next. And, a lot of people that I know are taking time off, leaving the sector, reevaluating. And so it feels like, what is more important right now than really bringing fun back? Because, that's energy. And, Mike, we were really struck by how you start the book by providing the context of like when you were actually working on the final draft and what was going on for you personally and the sort of irony in some ways of that. So can you tell us a little bit about the context of working on the book?
Yeah, so the underpinnings of the book happened through tragedy, but that's not what you're referencing. So in 2016, I lost my younger brother, which is important in the context of sort of what made me want to write the book, sort of processing, that trauma. And then, really finding joy and delight after that. But right when I sold the proposal to Simon & Schuster, the world essentially closed down. And on top of that, I was at a medical conference in March 2020 in Orlando and ended up getting a fairly mild infection from COVID. I was one of the early folks. And then unfortunately, at the end of May, it came back to haunt me. I thought I was fine, and then ended up, having long hauler issues for about 6 to 7 months, to the extent that I didn't know if I was going to get through that. Here's this amazing opportunity, and then, like life does, threw a curveball at my face. So I slowly but surely, during that time, I had the worst part of, everyone suffers through long hauler different that, unfortunately gets that condition. For me, it was insomnia like I'd never had before. I certainly had like mild anxiety during my doctoral work, where you would work up till 3 and you had so much caffeine, that you would have problems sleeping. And so I didn't know what true insomnia was. Whatever it did to my brain chemistry, I was able to get like 90 minutes of sleep a night. And, after about 3 weeks of that, it certainly leads to, clinical outcomes, which I had to deal with. And so I didn't know up from down, but I knew that, being able to enjoy things was probably out there. And so that kind of helped me go. And so, yeah, that's the context of that, is that, again, sometimes we have these amazing opportunities, but we got to put them on pause because, life has other plans for us, right?
There's something really important, I think, in the relationship between fun and disruption in your life. Can you maybe just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, fun is a tool that's almost accessible at any point, and that's what I found it as an interesting construct, right? No matter what's happening to us, and it's not necessarily from the vantage point of a Pollyanna attitude, but it is that even when we were processing, immense change, perhaps trauma, or going through any other difficult situation, if we reclaim the agency and autonomy that we have, we can bias our activities and the way we spend our time, likely in ways that are more enjoyable than just letting time pass us by. And using that as a construct of, okay, so here are all the things that are sort of happening to me or I have to do. What are those things? Because there's some things that you're always going to need to do, but then where do I have control over outside of that? And then to what degree can I orchestrate a life, within the confines of what I'm responsible for, and really start to enjoy things more. Because you kind of alluded to it earlier, Janice. I think so many of us that are operating through this lens of duty or, whether you call it passion or commitment or whatever it is, that's important. I don't villainize that at all. I mean, this book isn't about living a whimsical life, right? It's suggesting that so many of us are not taking at least some time off the table for renewal, that we're burning out and we're not able to do that stuff. And so there are two things that are happening there, right? One is we're not showing up as the best version of ourselves. Here we are wanting to live a dutiful life, wanting to make an impact, potentially wanting to be a change maker. And we don't have the vigor and vitality to do that because we're burning it at both ends. The other is, if we could still do that stuff and then also live a joyful life, why not? And so, I mean, it's kind of there. And for whatever reason, especially here in the US, we're the last to get the message. I mean, you're seeing countries all across the EU kind of get it, right? Like even nonprofits, academia, and certainly in business, companies that are shutting down the email server on Friday to kind of send that social normative message that go recharge your batteries on Saturday and Sunday because we want you to show up Monday, able to have the capacity to do the hard stuff. And for whatever reason here, call it the Puritan work ethic, call it whatever you want. We just think, oh, okay, dinner's over. Let's answer emails till our head hits the pillow. And we don't understand that means we wake up in the morning not really wanting to, tackle the big challenges because we have no energy left.
Yeah, it's sort of, I love that you make a case for fun. Like your book is really research based and rigorous, and then it's also really practical. And I was reading, you don't have to make a case to me, Mike. Like I'm fully bought in, but I love that is there, right? Because I think there is, especially in the work culture, which is the context of this podcast, is people are thinking about their work. And before we kind of hit record, like you alluded to it, like a lot of people who work in fundraising or nonprofits, like they're dealing with like the world's biggest problems, right? Like people who don't have housing, people who don't have food, people who are ill. Like it's easy to sort of have a heaviness around that. And one story I loved, I was saying to Margaret, I loved you talking about Judy, your dental hygienist. Because, that's a job that doesn't necessarily always feel like it might be the most fun. But tell us about Judy, because I think that's a great story for people to think about. Whatever you do for work, you can make it more fun.
Yeah, and I love Judy. She just retired, but and she's such an interesting character because I think you have to be, right? And we're about to get into it, so don't worry. I'll reveal what's so special about Judy. But her story just got picked up by Time magazine, so neat. I got to text her like, "Hey, you're in Time," because she's so she comes from this level of service where she hasn't asked for any of that, so it's neat to tell her. But so about Judy, essentially, she went through, again, what we were talking about. She had, a fairly traumatic experience, if you believe the psychological literature. I think divorce is, in some contexts, can be more disruptive than death, right? And so she was going through a fairly challenging divorce, and she had been a homemaker, and so she needed to find a new job. And but she had 2 kids. And so she looked to dentistry because dentistry has fairly reasonable hours, right? And it was something where she felt she could contribute and be of service to people. What she didn't anticipate once she got into that vocation was because she was, a fairly optimistic person, that a lot of people view that hour in the dentist chair as the worst part of their week, right? So here is this like really optimistic, joyful person who essentially realized that she had gotten into a vocation where everyone didn't look forward to seeing her. And so there was some serendipity in her story. Someone who had a kind of positive slant like her had gifted her a crazy costume one time. And so Judy decided to wear it during one of her cleanings. And she noticed that that person didn't have, that feeling of like, she just kind of fixated on Judy's costume, and they really had a good time and everything was really playful. So she did it again, got the same experience with the next patient, and again and again. And she's like, wow, this is a way to really liven it up. And so she continued with that practice day after day. She would, create a new costume, and people would come, myself included, I was one of her patients, would actually look forward to getting their teeth cleaned. And I just think it's so profound with regards to, a nice metaphor for the whole message in the book. I mean, everyone, including, the dentist in there, didn't know what she was doing still until she retired, was like, I don't really get it. But all of her patients were like, no, this is so amazing because, now I actually want to go to the dentist. So much so that some people, because they were now in a lighthearted mood, wouldn't need nitrous. So she actually reduced the amount of medicine people needed to take. That's how impactful just having a playful, fun attitude at work had. And so that's just one micro example of, how this can be applied across a whole spectrum of different things.
Yeah. There's something, as you're talking about fun, and you write about this in the book, that it's different from happy. It's different from this constant quest for happy. And I think you shared that you changed your thinking about that around the death of your brother, but maybe you can share with us a little bit about how are they different and why is one more important?
Well, I think what I found, again, I used to be, a big zealot of happiness research, at least, and I still am. I think a lot of the tools of positive psychology in context are really helpful, right? I still love gratitude, and I've still certainly loved mindfulness. I think what happened is they kind of got overprescribed. So when the motivation doesn't hit, there's this dissonance, what we call toxic positivity, that can be really problematic. But to answer your question, happiness, especially in the sense of psychology, has been boiled down to what we call subjective well-being, right? I mean, we measure it by numbers. And so that already becomes problematic, right? One, because it's an act of evaluation. You're now out of the moment. So it really requires you to sort of ruminate on, okay, how do I feel, instead of actually engaging in life. And then two, once you boil it down to, essentially a scale, you're going to hit, once you get to a 10, where do you go from there? Right. And so they're always, once you fixate on that, you're always kind of now either at your peak or not happy. And especially if you're in a period of your life where it's appropriate to unpack, what challenging experience you're having. So for my brother, creating a psychological space to mourn, and where unhappiness is an appropriate response, to that unfortunate event. Fixating on happiness, this whole, meme culture of good vibes only becomes, again, really problematic, because all of a sudden it can start to seep into your identity. Like, oh my goodness, these curated lives of folks on Instagram, they're always good. And now I'm here. What does that mean? Oh, it must mean I'm an unhappy person. And so the discrete answer is, it really is this act of evaluation, where, kind of falling back on my research on workplace wellness and social determination theory, when we have autonomy, when we really feel like we have control over our domain, that's when we thrive, because it doesn't matter anymore. We realize that, again, our emotional state can be a certain way, but we can really steer our ship in a way that does connect us to things so that we feel good about them, so that, we're enjoying what we're doing, even if we're tackling a heady problem like a lot of your listeners are.
Yeah. I think I loved the, when you talked about like fun is biased towards action, it's like it's something we do, and you can be doing that in any context, you don't have to dismiss like the complexity of the different emotional situations that you're dealing with in your life to have fun.
Yeah, and then you don't need to rectify them either, right? You're essentially, and so I think in the world of change makers and folks that are trying to make an impact, another thing I would suggest is you need things that are invigorating, right? I mean, what I studied is folks that in earnest are really trying to do the difficult work. If it starts to skew towards martyrdom, all of a sudden they're not even taking care of themselves, right? They're like, oh, I need to do this for the cause. You do that long enough, and it's clear that a majority of folks ultimately won't have anything left in the tank. And then you won't be able to, contribute anyways. And so figuring out ways, again, there's sort of three constructs, right? The environment that you're doing it in, the people that you're with, or the way that you're doing it. If any of those is really, really grinding you down and, quote unquote, not fun, what are ways to potentially improve that particular, construct of how you're going about your work so that you are at least enjoying some parts of it?
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, I think it'd be great to get into the idea of autonomy, because I think what I liked in your book was you pointed out that sometimes when we think about fun at work, it's like, let's have a social, committee and impose ideas of fun on people, which like most people don't think are fun. So talk about that. Like it is a very customized, personalized, autonomous approach that you're taking to fun at work.
Yeah, and the reception has been mixed because a lot of people are like, "You're the fun guy. You gotta, tell us, especially leadership, like how do we have fun?" Well, first, to your point, I mean, it does become complex, especially the more people that are involved. And so you need to start by creating psychological safety, which is a heady task. A lot of people are like, but so that's why I took the individual approach, because it really does start with the individual, right? Like understanding how can you create space so that autonomy can thrive. And so does that mean figuring out what are the enjoyable ways you can go about your work? What are the ways to create space within your work so that you can take a break that is enjoyable, maybe if the work is challenging, right? Like, so part of my academic work was trying to treat physician burnout. And I would go into that space and find out that these folks are dealing with patients, 40 to 60 hours a week. So how do we create that for them, right? And so we'd be in these meetings, and I'd say, well, first we need to reduce their workload, and that would be a stop, right? And so I think figuring out how to create space so that people really can enjoy their time becomes an important first step, especially within this work culture that we have here in the US. And so then once you have that, once you feel like you are able to control the way that you deliver your work, as long as it's in line with what you need to achieve. So I talk about that in the chapter 2, making sure like, okay, what is expected of me? Because in this new realm of knowledge work, the goalposts can move if we're not explicit about what is needed, right? But once you know that, then you know what the playground looks like, right? And then you can start to incorporate fun and playful elements in the way that you go about your work.
Yeah, what would you say to people who don't identify as particularly playful, who maybe identify more as serious or, and I know there's a big split between introversion and extroversion sometimes too. But
no, but I think that goes to what Janice was saying. Like a lot of people, the way they're going to find fun is, being calm, being serene. In the book, I bring up the work of Jeannie Tsai out of Stanford. And another really problematic thing, especially here in the West, is that the way we advertise fun are like, folks all hand in hand, jumping and clicking their heels on the beach, right? Fun for a lot of people is enjoying their lunch hour and reading a good book so they can go back the second half of the day and be the best version of themselves, instead of, again, if there are any leaders listening, being forced into lunch, which is essentially going to be an extension of work. And so now you've had a 9-hour workday instead of 2 4-hour segments. And again, all of this might seem pretty pedestrian, but when you look, at an immense amount of research, one, people start to hate their job, right? Which is awful. And then two, they're far less productive because they essentially have now worked way too long. And so whether you call it fun or call it renewal, these things become extremely important, just so that we can enjoy the time that we do have.
Yeah, I think, exactly that. Like and I think sometimes I know for me, like I love reading, and I was reading something else that I won't name recently, and they had this list of like, these are the activities ranked of like what is the most fun for people. And reading was very low on the list. And I'm like, well, I don't care, because for me, it's super fun, right? And I'm in a book club and I listen to a book podcast. And like I even find it fun to like go on the library and like manage my library holds. I find it fun to go to the library and like pick up a book or return a book. Like, it's just like that's who I am. And so I think that, yeah, like sometimes we see these kind of like, well, most people think this is fun, like going to a bar and drinking. I'm like, well, that's not fun for me.
Yeah, I think that's what, well, speaking of that, it was like 4 or 6 weeks ago, but a French gentleman just won, a landmark case in France because essentially the company culture said that was what was fun. And he kept saying he didn't want to go. And so they eventually fired him because they said, you're not a good fit for this company. And he won because that's forced fun, right? And it really is problematic. So yeah, I think you just need to be careful there. And especially in my work, it's challenging because people wanted me to have this really discrete definition of fun. And I made sure that it was a big tent because that's what the science suggests. I mean, pleasurable experiences are so unique to the individual. To say they need to be, 3 things or, whatever, to have those kind of constraints wouldn't be in line with the way that I see, things fitting in. Again,
it's also
for me,
funny that we try to like jam, like let's jam fun in as opposed to taking anything else out. Like you were talking about the physicians, like we're not going to work. It's going to add more pressure of like,
yeah, that's right. Like, again, that's how you start is essentially making space, because making fun just another item on your to-do list, is yeah, that's a mess. And so the way I look at fun, I kind of alluded to it before. And again, in line with, the way we look at happiness is fun's a lot more about finding fit, right? Like that connection, whether that is with friends, whether that is, really engaging with new material and learning things, whether that's folks that love to be out in nature, whether it's a spiritual practice, anything where you're really feeling good and it's pleasurable for you, that to me classifies as fun, right? For me, I fit the standard mold. Like I, like to be at a loud concert and kind of jumping around with other people. For my wife, it's curling up with, historical nonfiction at the pool. And that's great. She has a big smile on her face when she's doing that and comes back, to the real world way more refreshed than if I had dragged her out to a cocktail party or whatever it is. So I feel like that's important. Where so many other things are, to your point, where do they rank? Book ranks at the bottom. What, not to use any expletives. What does it even mean? I'm glad you gave me, what you feel is fun. Thanks for nothing, really, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm trying to aspire in my life to be able to say the words like, no part of that was fun. Like, this is not a repeater for me, really just to get super clear, both on what is fun, but also like, that was not fun.
And that's what becomes important, right? Like, again, it's part of the process in the book. If you're not mindful of those things, they tend to habituate. I'm surprised, social media use and channel surfing and what folks are now calling doom scrolling. I was certainly a victim of that during COVID, just watching the same news over and over again, provided no value, but it certainly made me, have poor mental hygiene. But one of the things that I found is friendships out of convenience, like folks that just sort of, have this coffee date with someone they don't really enjoy just because that's, it's become routine. And so there's a lot of things I think once you become mindful and like, wow, this is just, either toxic or, not a good use of my time because it's not leading to either person's benefit. Being mindful that, obviously being considerate and kind, but figuring out, I just don't want to waste time in this way anymore, then opens up the space for doing things that you really do enjoy.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up shortly, and you've been kind enough to share something with us that we can share with our listeners. And we're going to ask you to kind of challenge, but I think if just before we do that, maybe you can introduce the play model, because I think that's an important part of this challenge, and kind of just give us a high level overview of what that model looks like.
Definitely. So in the book, there's something called the play model, which is a simple 4-quadrant model. Play stands for pleasing, living, agonizing, and yielding. And it's essentially a way to get mindful of how you're spending your time. And so pleasing and living are things that we enjoy doing. Pleasing are things that are really easy to do, that we like. And then living are things that lead to more peak experiences. And so they're harder to do. We can't do them all the time. But in the book, I make a case that indexing more of those, allows us to have more opportunities to potentially create, rich memories that lead to a lot more encoded information. I make a case for why that's important. But what's more fun about this model is the yielding and agonizing categories, which both are things that are not fun to do, right? So yielding doesn't take a lot of energy, and we don't really get any enjoyment of it, but oftentimes we can be tricked into thinking that it's enjoyable because it essentially pacifies discomfort, right? And so again, we alluded to what those are, things like doom scrolling, spending too much time on social media, doing things that we've habituated that, we don't really know why. It's just sort of how we pass time because we haven't been having any fun. So we don't have any energy to do anything else. And then agonizing are things, those are the things that generally, we can't completely eliminate because, if we're living a productive life, we need to do hard things. But oftentimes when we identify them as such, they're creative ways to potentially make them more enjoyable or potentially reduce them. Like something as simple as a habitual meeting you go to each week, that you realize after looking at it, like, I didn't need to be in that meeting for the last 8 weeks. I can just not go to it because there's no reason for it. I hate that meeting. So something as simple as that. But in the book, I give a whole host of different examples. So I'd like to share with your listeners, there's a way to do that time audit. The play model is easily accessible online if you just Google search it. And I have a time auditing worksheet that's available at share.michaelrucker.com/time-audit. It's just a Google sheet. You do need to have a Google account to be able to download it, but it allows you to sort all the things that you do. And then on another tab, it shows you a pie chart of how you're spending your time. So you can see like, wow, I'm not doing anything that I enjoy, and hopefully become mindful of that and decide it's time for a change to potentially find some things that, first to create some space, but then hopefully integrate some things that do light you up.
Yeah.
Nice. I think, we work so much in the nonprofit space and there's so much burnout. We're just really hearing there's so much burnout. They're having trouble filling empty positions. This is for our community. This is maybe a great exercise.
I'm gonna share a story of an agonizing thing that I got rid of when I used to work at a consulting firm. I was a prospect researcher, right? So it was my job to help identify potential people to interview when we were trying to see if a campaign was possible. And we would have these big, 1-hour meetings with the senior person on the team and a few other people. And I was very busy. So an hour of my time, we had a lot of these meetings. And finally I went to my boss and I was like, there's only really 5 minutes of this meeting that is applicable to me. So could that be at the beginning and then I could leave? So I would come in and literally they would tell me what I needed to do. And then I was like, I could use that hour to be looking for these people you need me to find, as opposed to sitting in this meeting, listening to you talk about things. So, sometimes it's that didn't take away from anything. The meeting still happened. Everybody got what they needed. It was just all that had to do was the agenda. I was the first agenda item and then I was free to go,
And then what's great is once you set the stage for that, you change the normative behavior. Like people realize like, wait, that's possible. So in the book, I talk about Brad Wills that kind of set the stage, through leadership to be able to do that. And then people start to make better choices, right? They're like, wow, okay, this was a tremendous waste of time. And sometimes meetings will just get canceled, right? Like, hey, we could have just done that with an agenda, that where we didn't have to come together, but, people just want that visibility of what people are doing, whatever it is, right? I don't need to get off on a tangent, but again, each one of these things, there's generally a way to either improve the way it's done or potentially change it. And so I think, again, it just takes us kind of getting out of our, the rhythms of life and understanding like, wow, okay, I do have a little bit of control. And again, it's not about over optimization. Like, people are like, so how do I quantify fun? Like, oh my goodness. Okay. So you haven't been listening.
Stop it. Yeah.
Go back and start reading from page 1.
Yeah.
Reread the book. Yeah. Totally. That's funny. Yes. But I do hear you saying part of this is really questioning when we have a narrative about how something has to be done.
Yeah. And I think for anyone, especially your listeners, again, if someone does invest in the book, maybe start with chapter 11. But it's this idea that even if you're coming from this sense of duty, like, I just can't make that happen. The mental reframe of going, okay, well, if you do want to be a good steward of whatever cause you're trying to, provide service to, you are being a better steward of that opportunity by taking a little bit of time off the table for yourself, because you show up as a better person. So you have, again, more vitality and vigor to approach that problem, but you're also a nicer person generally. And we know through social contagion that if everyone is ground to a nub, then it becomes a toxic environment anyways. So allowing people to have space outside of the heady issue that you're trying to tackle, then, when you get together, you actually enjoy that time too. So it can either be a downward spiral or an upward spiral. And I think most people, if given the choice, would, choose the latter, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, everybody who listens to our podcast is doing their part, to make a better world. And so I'm just going to say, like, for everyone who's listening, you deserve to have fun while you're doing that.
Yes,
agreed.
Absolutely. And what a great topic to open the year with some good challenge. So Mike Rucker, author of The Fun Habit, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we'll put a link in the show notes so everyone can see where to get the book. Is it out right now?
It is out. Yep.
It's out. Okay, it's out right now. Get your orders in. Buy now. Don't even have to pre-order. So great. Yeah. So we're going to remind you that what we're asking you to, we'll put a link to the worksheet, and you can evaluate your activities and then see how they stack up to the play model and where you might want to make some changes. And we're also going to offer a free resource this week, which is a worksheet to help people identify their core values, which is, I think, another component, part of the way that you come to figure out what is fun for you is by actually knowing what it is that you value. So thanks so much, Mike, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. This was fun.
Great. So this podcast is brought to you by Fundraising Leadership. We provide unique coaching and training programs to nonprofit leaders. Please subscribe if you haven't already. You can find us wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you're enjoying the show, you can help us continue to bring thoughtful content with a one-time contribution. This supports our show and keeps it ad-free. Contribute today using the link in the show notes, and you'll receive access to one of our highly acclaimed online courses. So now, go put it into practice.
Curious.